My dad called off my wedding, but the venue's call took us all by surprise. It was the kind of line you would expect to read in a gossip column or overhear in a hushed cafe conversation, not the opening act of my own wedding day. Yet there I was, standing half-dressed in white satin, mascara wand frozen near my eye, as my father stormed into the bridal suite with the air of a man delivering a final verdict, declaring in a voice that silenced everyone, "The wedding is off." And for a second, I thought he was joking, because surely no one, not even my famously domineering father, would cancel his daughter's wedding on the morning of it, with the flowers already arranged, the string quartet tuning, the cake chilling 3 floors below. But as I looked at him, jaw tight, eyes avoiding mine, I realized he meant it. He believed he had the right to end it all because he had decided that my fiancé's family had disrespected him in negotiations, that the cost was ballooning beyond reason, that he would not be made a fool of, and therefore he had already called the venue and taken care of it, as if he were returning a defective appliance instead of dismantling my future. And my bridesmaids gasped. My mother's bangles clattered against her wrists as she wrung her hands. Jazz, my maid of honor, muttered a curse under her breath before shooting me a glance that said, "Are you going to let him do this?" And all I could manage was a whisper, raw and trembling, "Dad, what are you talking about?" But he barreled forward, insisting that it was his duty as my father to prevent me from making a mistake, that I was blinded by love, that he had the authority to stop the circus before it humiliated us all. And I felt something in me snap, a quiet star of heat igniting in my chest, small but deadly, because this was my life, my choice, my love, and he had reduced it to a line item he could scratch out. And just as my hands began to shake with rage, my phone buzzed across the vanity, vibrating like an omen. And an unknown number flashed across the screen, which I almost ignored, thinking it was some vendor with a petty question about table settings, but instinct made me answer. And there it was, the call that would tilt the balance. "Hi, is this Aisha Qureshi?" A bright female voice asked. "This is Leela from the Blue Shore, your wedding venue. I just wanted to confirm something strange. We received a call this morning from a man claiming to be canceling your event, but since he isn't listed as an authorized contact, we thought it best to check directly with you." And I felt the blood drain from my father's face as I locked eyes with him, repeating slowly into the phone, "No, absolutely not. The wedding is not canceled." And Leela continued, her tone polite but firm, "That's what we thought. Your planner updated the contract on Thursday. Only you and your fiancé can authorize changes now, so you're all set. And also, the Gupta family wired the second installment last night, so the event is paid in full. Congratulations." And it was like the room shifted on its axis, my father stiffening as the truth slipped from my lips. "Dad, you don't control this anymore." And in that instant, for the first time in my life, the force field of his authority cracked because his leverage was money and power, and now both had slipped away. The venue siding with me, the groom's family securing the final balance, the contract locking him out, and I stood there in half a dress with my phone pressed to my ear, but inside I was standing taller than I had ever had, because the wedding was back on, because I was not a child to be overruled, because the world had handed me proof in writing that only I could decide. And though he sputtered about mistakes and shame and family honor, the damage was done, the tide had turned, and while my bridesmaids hurried to fix my hair, and Jazz muttered, "Hell yes," under her breath, and my mother's eyes welled with silent relief, I realized that sometimes revenge doesn't come with fire or fury, sometimes it comes with a cheerful venue coordinator named Leela who knows how to read a contract. And in that moment, my father's empire of control began to crumble, not with a scream, but with the quiet authority of a voice on the phone saying, "We protect our couples." When I think back to the hours that followed, it feels like the universe itself was daring me to step into my own life without hesitation. Because after that phone call from the venue, everything moved in slow motion, but also with unstoppable force, the kind of clarity that comes only when a storm breaks and you realize you've been holding your breath for years. So when my father stormed out of the suite, muttering about ungrateful daughters and mistakes that can't be undone, I didn't chase after him. I didn't beg for his blessing. I simply let the door shut behind him like a chapter ending. And I turned back to the mirror and saw myself. Not the obedient little girl who had always folded her desires into neat corners to fit into his expectations, but the bride who would not be erased. And as my friends fixed the last pins in my veil and my mother dabbed her tears in silence, I felt the weight of choice settle on my shoulders, heavy but liberating. So when I finally walked down that aisle, every step was an act of defiance and devotion. and the rooftop overlooking the lake shimmered like it had been waiting for me all along, with sunlight bouncing off the water and the quartet playing a song that seemed to weave rebellion into harmony. And when my eyes found Rohan's, he was already smiling, like he knew exactly what had happened, like he'd been ready to stand beside me, not just in vows, but in battles. And as we said our promises, me rewriting them in the moment to swap obey for listen, grow, and protect, I realized that marriage wasn't about inheritance or obligation. It was about choosing each other against all odds. And the applause that erupted when we kissed wasn't just about love. It was about victory, about a community of people silently siding with us over the man who had tried to steal this day. So by the time we reached the reception, the air itself buzzed with freedom. Every laugh louder than normal, every glass raised higher, every toast sharper, as if the universe had conspired to throw a louder, prouder celebration simply because someone had tried to silence it. And when my phone buzzed again with another call from my father, I ignored it, choosing instead to dance with Rohan to the song we'd argued over for months, but finally agreed on because it felt like compromise and joy stitched together. And later, when my father did show up outside the venue, I only learned of it because Leela, the same unshakable coordinator, told me afterwards that he had tried once more to talk his way in, claiming emergency rights as the father of the bride, and she had calmly pointed to the contract again and said, "Sir, you're not authorized." And apparently the look on his face was something between disbelief and defeat, which, if you knew my father, was a kind of poetic justice no speech could have delivered, because the man who prided himself on being untouchable was stopped by nothing more than a line in a contract and the conviction of a woman doing her job, and if that isn't revenge in its sweetest form, I don't know what is, because my revenge wasn't screaming at him or cutting ties. It was standing in a white dress on that rooftop, rings on our fingers, laughter in the air, living the life he said I wasn't ready for. And later that night, long after the sparklers fizzled out and Rohan carried me over the threshold of our hotel suite, I finally answered his call. And instead of the usual bluster, there was only a quiet, broken voice saying, "I thought I was saving you, but really, I was saving my pride." And for once, I didn't feel the urge to argue. I simply told him, "Dad, you don't get to cancel my life. Not anymore." And though silence followed, it wasn't the heavy silence of control. It was the stunned quiet of someone realizing they had lost the only weapon they'd ever used. And the next day, when he met me at a cafe by the marina, humbled and hesitant, I laid it out for him, that I loved him, that I wanted him in my life, but that he no longer got to dictate my choices, that the era of interference was over. And to my shock, he nodded, truly nodded, and said he wanted to learn how to listen. And I realized then that the venue's call had not only saved my wedding, but had rewritten the balance of our relationship forever. And as Rohan squeezed my hand under the table, I smiled, because the revenge I got wasn't just poetic, it was permanent, a boundary drawn so clearly that even my father, with all his pride, could no longer cross it. And as I bit into a mango rose tartlet the cafe served, as if the universe itself wanted to wink at me, I thought, he called off my wedding, but in the end, I called the shots, and nothing has ever tasted sweeter.